So this is the playbook that Democrats in the media now run, and they are the same. Okay, the Democratic media complex is a thing. They all run the same playbook, and they have attempted to weaponize woke capital on their own behalf. So what happens is there's a controversial social issue that crops up. And the first thing they now do is they go get a couple of journalists who are indistinguishable from people who work for Media Matters. And they have those people call up various corporations, like random corporations, be like, don't you have an opinion on X? Your silence is deafening. Why doesn't Taylor Swift speak up about gay marriage? Why doesn't random video game company speak up about abortion? And you think I'm kidding? I'm not kidding. This is their entire shtick now. Because if they cannot cudgel the American people into doing what they want in various areas, they are hoping that perhaps they can get corporations to exert pressure on governments via the power of the markets in order to get done what they want to do. All they have to do is call up some nervous Nellies on the board and get those nervous Nellies to start mirroring their left-wing priorities. Which is why there was a large spate of stories yesterday, all about Democrats in the media attempting to do journalism that's actually activism. It's not, by the way, it's not journalism to find out whether a video game company has a perspective on abortion. That's not a story. You're manufacturing a story. It's like going to your next door neighbor as a reporter and being like, so, what do you think about the conflict with China over the Taiwan Straits? Like, that person doesn't need to have an opinion. That person isn't an expert. That person isn't making policy. So the hell are you talking about? But this is what the media do. They try to find people who have market power and who employ people, and then they try to cudgel them into place to do their dirty work for them. And then they pretend this is journalism. So, for example, Nathan Grayson and Shannon Lau, writing for the Washington Post, in the video games section, quote, as Roe versus Wade repeal looms, video game industry stays mostly silent. The F? Well, I mean, if the people who make Elden Ring don't have an opinion on abortion, I don't know what we're going to do here. According to the Washington Post, quote, in the wake of a leaked draft Supreme Court opinion essentially confirming that Roe versus Wade's days are numbered, most of the video games industry's biggest companies have remained conspicuously quiet. They make video games. Are they in the abortion industry? Are they doctors? Like, why are you even asking this question? The answer is because they're attempting to pressure employers into getting involved. That's the whole goal here. It's gross. It really is yucky. Shortly after Politico first reported on the leaked Supreme Court draft on May 2nd, Sony purchased Destiny 2 studio Bungie published a statement in support of reproductive rights, calling Roe versus Wade's demise a blow to freedom in America and a direct attack on human rights, and prompting fans to donate to reproductive rights-focused organizations. In the following days, indie developers and a handful of other studios, like Psychonauts 2 creator Double Fine and Guild Wars developer ArenaNet, published brief statements of their own. A handful of workers told the Post they'd participate in a week-long Mother's Day strike aimed at protesting the potential overturn of Roe versus Wade, which again is super Orwellian stuff. I'm protesting on Mother's Day in favor of killing the thing that makes people mothers. The majority of gaming's heaviest hitters appear to have kept both their mouths and their wallets closed. The silence is especially conspicuous following the industry's near unilateral support of causes like Black Lives Matter in the wake of George Floyd's murder and anti-Asian hate as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. In both of those cases, many big companies released statements, donated to charitable causes, updated internal policy. This is why, by the way, these corporations were morons to have engaged in this in the first place. The minute you give an inch to the left, they will now demand that they run all of your social policy. You decided to cave to them because you were afraid they were going to say mean words about you because of BLM. And so you gave to a bunch of organizations that bought Patrisse Cullors a $6 million home. And now these same people are coming back to you for more. Like, well, I see that you haven't donated to Planned Parenthood lately. I see that you haven't said anything about Emily's List. Never let your boardroom become the preserve of left-wing activists who masquerade as journalists. And if you do, you're an idiot. You're an idiot CEO. The Washington Post contacted 20 major video game companies about whether they plan to make a statement regarding Roe's potential repeal or provide employees with monetary aid in places where abortions would no longer be available. Like that's not journalism, guys. That is not journalism. When you go to companies and then you try to pressure them to do the thing you want them to do, that's just activism. And you should just go work for Media Matters or hang out with Judd Legamugum. That's what, that is your job. So now you're pretending you're a journalist. You're not a journalist. You're an activist, and it's gross. How do we know how stupid this is? So apparently, Sony PlayStation staff are now fuming over their CEO's abortion comments. So PlayStation was trending on Twitter yesterday. It was trending on Twitter because the CEO put out a statement, and his statement said that employees should respect differences of opinion on abortion, And then he did 5 paragraphs about his 2 cats' first birthday, which, frankly, is the proper response to all of this. You're allowed to have whatever opinions you want to have. Also, my cat had a birthday. That seems like a perfect response from the PlayStation CEO. But apparently, this is now super controversial. And this person must be yelled at. We have to yell at Jim Ryan, the PlayStation president, because he didn't take a position that we like on abortion. Okay, any corporation that caves to this deserves whatever it gets. And I'm happy to see them ripped down by the left and turned into tools. Eventually, counter market pressures are beginning to have an impact. Well, companies are starting to realize that this is incredibly stupid, to cave to the idiot journalists who work for Media Matters. They're starting to realize this for a few different reasons. Reason number 1 is because the market does not approve of this sort of activity. So, for example, when it runs directly up against their profit margins, they start to freak out. So the best example of this is Netflix. So Netflix, you'll remember, has Dave Chappelle. They pay Dave Chappelle a fortune in order to do comedy specials. And those comedy specials do enormous business for Netflix. Netflix has been taking it on the chin in terms of subscriber numbers, right? Their numbers are really, really down. And so they can't afford to lose pieces of content like Dave Chappelle. So they put out a memo to their own employees saying that they are not going to cave to sort of the woke censors at this point. They put out, according to Variety, a memo, an update to its corporate culture memo for the first time in 5 years. The core principles of the Netflix culture memo, including empowering employee decision-making, requiring candid feedback, and terminating staffers who aren't up to dream team snuff, remain intact. But there are some key changes. For starters, the document has a new title, Netflix Culture, Seeking Excellence. More significantly, the document adds a new directive for employees to act with fiscal responsibility. So, in other words, don't just spend a bunch of money on crap that you like. It actually has to make some sort of economic sense. The updated Netflix culture memo also includes a new section called Artistic Expression, explaining that the streamer will not censor specific artists or voices, even if employees consider the content harmful, and bluntly states, if you'd find it hard to support our content breadth, Netflix may not be the place for you. Okay, that is Netflix saying to the wokesters and members of the media, we are not going to play this game. We are not going to play this game where you guys get to dictate content to us, because their bottom line was threatened, which demonstrates again that the left has attempted to use the media to astroturf fake campaigns against companies to push them to the left. And then they've gone to their friends in the government and had those members of the government subtly and not so subtly threaten companies with regulation or with bans or with some sort of punishment if they don't do what the left wants. And the companies have been reacting to those incentives. And now there are counter incentives, meaning that the market is looking at these places and saying, well, if you wish to work for the left, we don't wish to work with you. And they're getting counter incentives in a couple of really important ways. So one is from places like Florida. And obviously, Ron DeSantis leading the path on this. Rich Lowry has a really, really good piece in the New York Times today called Republicans Need a New Leader. They are looking to Florida. As you know, I think Governor DeSantis is the best governor in the country. He's also my governor here in the state of Florida. And Ross Douthat really nails it. He says, for all the talk about how Trumpy DeSantis is, there's much about him that recalls the party's pre-Trump era. He was elected to Congress as a Tea Party conservative in 2012. He's fond of boasting that Florida's budget is roughly half the size of New York's, even though his state is more populous. He's proud and protective of Florida's status as a low-tax state. None of this is new. What stands out as a true departure is DeSantis' willingness to use government power in the culture war. Sometimes this has involved areas like public education, where the government has every right to set the rules. One such example is the Don't Say Gay bill, more properly known as the Parental Rights in Education bill, which prohibits classroom instruction on sexual orientation or gender identity in kindergarten through third grade. Another is the Individual Freedom Bill, which, among other things, prohibits promotion of the concept that a person, quote, must feel guilt, anguish, or other forms of psychological distress because of actions in which the individual played no part, committed in the past by other members of the same race, color, sex, or national origin. Then there's the fight with Disney. The revocation of its special tax status is a frankly retaliatory act that also presents free speech issues and could prove a legal and policy morass. That said, Disney got a truly extraordinary deal from the state that allowed it, in effect, to run its own city. The company never would have been granted this arrangement 55 years ago if its executives had told the state's leaders, and by the way, eventually the Walt Disney Company will adopt cutting-edge left-wing causes as its own. The broader point of making an example of Disney is to send a message to other corporations. There could be downsides to letting themselves be pushed by progressive employers into making their institutions weapons in the culture wars, and conclude it's best to stick to flying planes, selling soda, and so on. And Ross Douthat explains why so many people on the right have become sort of comfortable with this. He says, the key, I think, is that for many people on the right, a libertarian-oriented politics was largely a way to register opposition to the mandarins who have an outsized influence on our public life. It turns out that populism is an even more pungent way to register this opposition. Progressive domination of elite culture has now grown to include formerly neutral institutions like corporations and sports leagues. More conservatives are beginning to believe that the only countervailing institutional force is democratic political power as reflected in governors' mansions, state legislatures, and Congress. The central conservative truth is that it is culture, not politics, that determines the success of a society. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan of New York once wrote, Democrat. The central liberal truth is that politics can change a culture and save it from itself. Given the state of play, says Rich, conservatives have been learning to appreciate Moynihan's liberal truth. If Florida's culture war initiatives succeed, the education establishment in the state will not mindlessly absorb the latest left-wing fad. Corporations will be warier of wading into hot-button social fights. In other words, the culture of these institutions will have changed for the better. This is correct. Meanwhile, you have my friend Vivek Ramaswamy, who is coming up with a very creative way to fight back against woke capital by providing an alternative. He's doing something that we here at the Daily Wire have done, right? We're dedicating $100 million to making kids programming so that you can get great kids programming without the woke, and you can get away from Disney Plus, instead move over to DW Kids, for example. And that's something that Vivek is doing in the investment sphere. So he points out that major firms like BlackRock basically have said that they are using their market power in order to force companies in which they invest to mirror left-wing social priorities. Vivek is now offering people the opportunity to invest in the same companies that BlackRock is investing in, but use that great market power in order to push those companies to be apolitical. A lot of states are going to have an interest in that. A lot of state pension funds might have an interest in not pushing the political priorities of Larry Fink over at BlackRock and instead going apolitical and saying, listen, we like the trading, we don't like the social agenda. You were not elected. All of this is very good. So the fight against woke capital has begun, and that is definitely a positive. So all the avenues of victory for Democrats are currently being taken away. Electoral avenues of victory are being taken away. Judicial avenues of victory are being taken away. And the attempt to pervert the market through subtle and not so subtle cudgeling of corporations into taking a left-wing political stance, that's being taken away too. All of which bodes well for the future. I know, ending on an optimistic note here. A rarity here on the Ben Shapiro Show. But I am optimistic for the future because I think that the left, they can't get out of their own way. They just cannot. And because of that, and because people are fighting smarter and harder, I think that they are going to lose. I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Ben Shapiro Show. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you stay up to date with all our future content.